Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Come to order, please. Next Tuesday. Oh, first of all, the cell phones. Silence, please. Thank you. Welcome to Lunch with Books. My name is Sean. Hi. Next Tuesday, May 12th, Allison Patini Davis, who was here before and did the Pittsburgh Zombie program, and she's also a poet, has a novella called Business, which is about the nightlife of working class women on the eve of Youngstown, Ohio's deindustrialization. Well, that sounds interesting. And then on the 19th, The Outlaw Sam Mason with Joe Roxby. Our guest today is actually a local person. I didn't know that, just found out. Julia Flint is a writer from the Appalachian Rust Belt. She is the daughter of a steelworker and a therapist with a background in qualitative research. She has worked for the last decade as a research assistant on projects related to community health and education. Her new book is called We Were Promised: How an Appalachian Grandmother Fought a Corporate Giant. Please welcome Julia Flint.
Thank you, Sean. Thanks, everyone. Is the volume okay? Yes. Okay, great. I just remembered that I have notes, so I'm going to find those. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for navigating challenging parking. Thank you to those online who are here from further away. Yeah, I love Wheeling, and I'm so excited to be here. This is also, as I'm looking around, such a tapestry of like people I've known at different moments in my life. So thank you all for coming out today. So I'm going to talk about my book, We Were Promised: How an Appalachian Grandmother Fought a Corporate Giant. I packed a lot into this, so I'm going to go through it a little quickly. Hopefully we'll have time at the end for questions. And I am excited to present today. There were so many photos that I got to look at as I was doing the research for this, and it helped me just to have like a fuller, clearer picture of the story and of the people involved. So I don't always get to share those in readings, so I'm definitely excited to be able to present today. And this is a recent story. I want to, though, just start briefly in the 1950s when the Ravenswood plant was being built. First produced aluminum in 1957. And this was a decade in West Virginia, the 1950s to 1960s, when there is a huge exodus of population out of the state. Close to 7% of the population leaves in those 10 years. And the exception, there are a few counties that see a net increase in population, and two of those, Wood and Jackson, are kind of the surrounding the Ravenswood plant. And I say that just to make the point that people in Ravenswood, either they were from there or they also had moved up from places like southern West Virginia, were able to build really stable middle-class lives through their jobs at the plant. And quickly after the plant opens, it's organized by the United Steelworkers. This is an optimistic time still for labor in American manufacturing. And over the next 2 decades, 70s and 80s, we see those declines. By the 80s, I think there is maybe a sense that the better days are behind us. In 1989, certainly it's the end of an era in Ravenswood. Kaiser sells the facility to the Ravenswood Aluminum Company, owned by Glencore. And just to kind of give like an indication of this time, so you can see, 1950s as the plant is being built, as it opens. This is a chart of worker productivity and worker pay, hourly compensation, and you can see that The plant opens 1957. 1973 happens to be when Karen Gorel's husband, Mike Gorel, hired on. And that's the line here where you can see it diverge. And now productivity continues that trajectory upward, but hourly compensation does not. That stays flat. So one event that I want to note, this may be familiar to some, this was a big moment in labor history and happened also in Ravenswood. So the people you'll meet in this story had also gone through this 2-year labor battle in 1990 to 92. I mention it because you can see it called one of the most innovative contract campaigns ever waged by an American union. This was a moment where companies were going to greater lengths to disenfranchise the union. So instead of workers going on strike and being able to halt production, now companies are bringing in replacement workers to keep things going, right? And undermining the power of the strike. This was a moment in Ravenswood where the United Steelworkers, where labor really stepped up to meet that moment, and was recognized for going, sort of also like flipping their playbook and going to greater lengths in their campaign, which was successful. And I highlight it just because it was everyone who you'll meet in this story today was involved with this. This was their daily life for 2 years. And I think it gave Karen and others certainly like inspiration and motivation for knowing that this kind of win was possible. Catching us up to sort of where the story starts. So the lockout ends in 1992. In 95, Century Aluminum takes over Glencore's aluminum assets, including the Ravenswood plant. And a decade later, Mike Gorel, Karen's husband, retires after 33 years at the plant. 33 years is a long time to be working at a plant, and I say that to acknowledge that he's taking retirement before he's 65. He and Karen are both under 65, and so they really think through this decision and like what it means to be able to retire before they have full Social Security, Medicare. And one thing that Karen told me was really important in their decision making was knowing that through the union, through their contract, they would have health care for the rest of their life, that was in their contract. It was always the way it worked. Workers retired, they had the health care that was in place at the time they retire. So 4 years later, it comes as a shock to Karen and Mike, to others at the plant, who received this letter from Century Aluminum saying that at the end of 2010, their retiree health benefits will end. Is this one? Yeah, and what I wanted to note here is that, so a year before this, Century had idled the plant, not shut down, but no longer producing aluminum. So essentially everyone, most people have been laid off. And what they say is that this cut to retirement benefits is cost savings that will help them sort of get to a position where they can reopen the plant, bring people back to work. Context, because some of you might be thinking, well, in 2010, the Affordable Care Act was passed. And that is true, and that would provide a safety net for retirees. But in 2010, there wasn't a lot that the Affordable Care Act did. Those provisions of the bill were rolled out over time. So importantly, pre-existing condition exclusions, where an insurance company can deny someone because they have health conditions and might be considered too expensive to insure. So insurance companies can deny you. The Affordable Care Act changes that, but not until 2014. That doesn't go into effect. And so for people like Mike and Karen and other retirees who are not yet 65, they don't have access to Medicare, they are left without a lot of options. There were several people, who stories are in the book, who looked and couldn't find an insurance plan, either that they could afford or that was available to them. Cobra also was another option, employees could continue to pay for their benefits for a certain period of time. I think it was 6 months. But Karen and Mike Gorel, their quote for premiums was $2,000 a month. Mike Gorel's pension was $1,400 a month. So it didn't add up. And quote from Karen, she says, "All we want is what we paid for." Something that she stressed, and that was stressed again and again, is that these were benefits that were part of their union contract. And what I heard again and again is that the benefits for retirement were prioritized in Ravenswood, maybe more so than at other plants. And so again and again, workers were voting to maybe take home like a smaller chunk of money in their paycheck because they're paying more for their retirement benefits. And so this to say that, it's not it's not a charitable contribution, it's a contract. And of course, this wasn't just happening in Ravenswood. This, much closer to home, similar story. Workers are given notice at the end of March that in a few weeks, they are going to be without health care. There's a great book called Retirement Heist that goes in depth into how retirement plans and pensions that were fully funded and viable, like in the 70s, were rated over time, is the term that the author uses. So these are 3 quotes that open the book. The first, former Secretary of State Natalie Tennant writing to Century's CEO, saying those retirees were promised those benefits, and here in West Virginia, a promise made is a promise kept. Also inspiration for the book's title from Natalie Tennant. Senator Rockefeller, his office was very involved with the retirees. He worked, one of his senior staff worked very closely with Karen, and he here is saying every retiree across this country deserves someone as passionate and fearless as Karen on their side. And Karen says they didn't count on somebody having the courage to stand up and raise hell and fight back. And I think this was true. I mentioned this is not just happening in Ravenswood. There was the story that it was too expensive to insure retirees. It was an easy story to believe. It was a good story. The courts were siding with companies when it went to court, giving the green light to other companies. And retirees, demographic, older, might have limited income, health concerns. Like there weren't so many mass movements in the streets, right, as this is happening. But there was Karen, and just a little background on her. She was born in Parkersburg in 1950. I would say really she had an ordinary life for where she was born, right? She took some classes in college, met her husband, and when she was in her 20s, they married, had 2 kids. It's really a single income household with Mike working at the plant, but Karen works on and off. And in getting to know her, I will say that something that stood out to me was the fact that she demonstrated really throughout her life this commitment to standing up for herself and others. She credits that, her dad worked for the United Steelworkers. She felt his influence in her life was really influential. Her mother was very involved with the church and sort of had a strict morality that she felt was influential, both kind of shaping her sense of justice. So, November 2010, Karen and Mike have decided not to sign up for COBRA. Karen is thinking that she's going to apply for work and look for benefits, like that out of the 2 of them, she might be more likely to find a job that has benefits. And then, not long after, Karen meets Bryce Turner, and really meeting Bryce Turner takes this from like, what are Mike and I going to do, to oh my gosh, like there are so many people impacted and so many people who have major health concerns that they're dealing with. Bryce Turner worked at the Ravenswood plant for 36 years. In 2009, he was diagnosed with leukemia, and so he was laid off at the time, but knew like he wasn't going back to work. So he retires early, in part to lock in his health benefits. That is all finalized in February of 2010, and by November, he is with Karen at this meeting with the United Steelworkers, wondering what he's going to do. And that evening, Karen meets Bryce. She's home. She's overwhelmed at this point. She's in tears on her couch. Her daughter comes to visit, listens to Karen's story, listens to her talk about Bryce, and her daughter says, "Mom, you need to fight this. Someone needs to." And she knew her mom well enough to say, like, "I think it could be you." So Karen doesn't know what to think about this. She's not in the union. She doesn't have any experience organizing. But she wakes up the next morning and decides that Jody's right. Like, someone has to do something. She has to do something. And she starts that day making phone calls and writing to her elected officials. By the next month, she decides that she wants to organize a meeting of her elected officials, and that if, they can come and they can meet Bryce Turner or Sam McKinney, if they can talk to the retirees and like shake their hands, that they are not going to go back to Washington or Charleston and be able to walk away and do nothing. The meeting is successful. She gets staff from DC and Charleston to show up and hear the retiree story. And she also, importantly, at this meeting and around this time, starts connecting with other retirees who are also making phone calls and also writing emails, also trying to figure out what to do. So Karen came to call the group her retiree army, the retiree army. She writes here, "We are not rich in worldly goods. We are rich in morals and determination. We are volunteers, veterans, preachers, Sunday school teachers, nanas and papas, and we deserve better than to be tossed aside by corporate America in their insatiable quest for profit." This photo is some of the individuals who were really active with Karen: Larry Williams, Jim Weltner, Ripcord and Betty Dixon, Sonny Heinzman, a few others who you'll meet later on. So they now are meeting weekly and, coming together to say, like, how's it going for you? What's next? What can we try to do together? And in February, they find out that there's a bill that was introduced in the West Virginia legislature. And this is Senate Bill 575. It's convoluted, but the Energy Intensive Industrial Consumers Revitalization Tax Credit Act. Essentially, what it does is take coal severance tax dollars and funnel those to a break in the electricity cost for Century Aluminum. So Karen says, well, we've just been talking to our elected officials, like, there's no way that this is going to pass, but we're going to make sure that it doesn't pass. And so her mission, the retirees' mission, in February was to stop Senate Bill 575. She writes to the bill's sponsor. One of the bill's sponsors' jobs are very important to this state, but not on the backs of retirees. They may rob our health care, but our state does not have to be held hostage by this outlaw corporation. And quite remarkably, so they are going to Charleston now every chance they get to meet with any representative who will meet with them. They're calling still, they're sending letters, and they have a rally planned for March 3rd, where they've rented like 2 charter buses and are driving retirees down to the Capitol. They find out on March 2nd that this bill has made it to the Senate Finance Committee, and it ends there. The Senate Finance Committee says they're not going to move it forward. So Karen says, well, you know what? We're still showing up, and this is no longer just a protest, but also a celebration, because they know that, to Karen, their voices have been heard, and this now sort of puts them on the map and gives them leverage. It lets Century know that retirees can't be ignored. So here's a photo of Karen. This is one of her first public speaking events at the Capitol. Like I mentioned, there were a handful of other retirees' wives who are really active in this campaign, but this is also not an unfamiliar kind of picture or setting to see Karen there with a room or group mostly of men, and men in suits, elected officials, company officials. It really didn't matter who her audience was or who she was speaking to. She was Karen, and she was direct, and she let you know what was on her mind. So here's a photo from that event. Retiree here has a sign she's holding up that has the annual compensation of Century's CEO, $4,196,000. And so this is from the book. In the last few months, Karen felt that for the first time in her life, she was pulling back the curtain and taking a closer look at the workings of America's legal, political, and economic systems, and it all appeared less dependable than she had once imagined. She had believed that a signed contract was as good as a man's word, and that the court system would protect the average American against wrongdoing, and neither seemed to be true now. And, this book is in a lot of ways really a story of these retirees developing political consciousness, class consciousness. For their lives, they are white middle-class Americans. The American dream is, they are not excluded from it, right? And what I mean by that is that growing up, they could see that they had opportunities that were not available to their parents, and they could provide opportunities for their children that they didn't have, right? Everything sort of worked as it should until now, until it didn't. And when they tried to find recourse, I think it was a shock at how challenging it was to feel like they could be heard, or just to, feel like they had advocates on their side. And you'll see here a lot of blue t-shirts that people are wearing. I want to just give a close-up. This is a shirt that Karen's daughter designed for them, and they wore these shirts often. So I'm going to cover some events from the next few months. Karen really makes it let me read this first. So Karen says, "We need to fight this war like it was meant to be fought, not in a broken court system, not at a desk, but in the streets and in the media across this country." I think really, like I said, recognizes that those sort of traditional channels where you would expect to find recourse or make some, to resolve this situation, she doesn't feel like those are going to work. And so she says to the retirees, we have to find just one person at Century who has a heart, one person who can understand that there is a real human impact to this decision. And fortunately for the retirees, there is one board member who is within driving distance of Ravenswood in Cleveland, Ohio. Outside of Cleveland, the chair of the board, John O'Brien, lives and is on this foundation, the St. Luke's Foundation, also has to do with health and well-being, and the retirees say, well, wait a minute, if this guy cares about health and well-being, we have something to say. And you can see them here, they're picketing outside of the office of St. Luke's. They drive to Cleveland, they take 2 minivans up. You can tell it's not a very nice day. And after spending the morning in the rain, not really getting to connect with that many people, they say, John O'Brien also has a consulting business nearby, Chagrin Falls. It's only an hour away. Like, we should also show up there. So they do. And they show up to this White House that you can see in the newspaper photo. The consulting business is based out of John O'Brien's home. And I think fortunately, maybe he is on vacation with his family, so they don't meet him directly. But they do file out with their picket signs, and on his quiet residential street in Chagrin Falls, Ohio, they make a scene. And the police come, the police are called, police let them go, and the newspaper reporters, I think Karen actually called the reporter. And so when John O'Brien comes home from vacation, his home and the retirees are on the front page of his local newspaper. Coincidence or not, by the end of the year, John O'Brien was no longer chairman of the board of Century Aluminum. So next is California. Summer of 2011, June 2011. Century is headquartered in California. And Mike Worrell, Karen's husband, it must have been April or May, gets a letter in the mail saying, hey, the company's annual shareholders meeting is going to take place, as it does every year in California. And, you are a shareholder, so you are invited to come pre-COVID in person and, have your vote. Karen says, okay, we're going to California. And unfortunately, Mike Gorel, she knows, is not going to get on a plane. And so you can see this gentleman here, Ripcord, volunteered for this event to be Karen's husband. Because she doesn't own shares herself, so technically she doesn't have a ticket to this. But they managed to get in. There are 4 of them. I think at least one of them, it may have been their first time flying. And they go to California and crash this shareholders meeting. So I want to, this is a close-up of that shirt that Ripcord had on. And Bryce Turner had volunteered to go with them to California, and about 2 weeks before he's readmitted to Cleveland Clinic. So Karen says, I don't care, one way or another, Bryce is coming with us. And she has this t-shirt made that says, in Century Aluminum's efforts to ensure profit, they are terminating his promised retiree health care after 36 years of dedicated service. Profit over human life and dignity, murder without a gun, is a phrase that Karen would use again and again. So in the board meeting, she had requested, she's got her shirt covered still at this point, but had requested like an opportunity, there's, I guess, opportunity for anyone to stand up and speak. Karen says she has a few words to say, and she stands up and says to the board of directors, shame on you. And I want you to know this man, Bryce Turner, and I want you to remember, she says, every time you pull up to the bank with your fat profits check, I want you to remember what your decisions are doing to this man in West Virginia. So Karen's messaging is very direct. It's very consistent throughout. She says the core of her campaign is that retirees deserve the same respect as a CEO or board member, and pushes Century to consider the human cost of its decisions. She says again and again that she knows that they look at this as a line item. They look at the retirees, every one of them, 750 people, as a line item on a spreadsheet, and there's a $sign attached. And her goal in this campaign is to get them to see that these are people. So December 2011, it has now been a year, and they don't know that they're any closer to having insurance. Karen and Mike and many others remain uninsured, and others who cannot be uninsured, right, because of their health, are now paying thousands more out of pocket for the same care. There were examples of people paying $1,000 more a month for the medication that they needed. One evening, watching the news, Karen has an idea. She shows up to a retiree meeting and says that, I know you all are going to think this sounds crazy, but we need to get some tents and we need to take them and set up at the entrance to the at the entrance to the plant. And we tell Century that we aren't leaving until we get our health care. Karen proposes that they occupy Century Aluminum. And the plant is idled at this point, right? So there's not a lot of workers going in and out of the Century plant, but next door is Constellium Rolled Products, which is still operational. And so this entrance that they're talking about still has traffic every day. So context, just on the Occupy movement, began in New York City, September 2011. Protesters were speaking out against rising inequality, and what they saw was wealth and resources being funneled to the top 1%, was the language used, while ignoring the needs of the 99%. This is coming after instability and uncertainty have undermined the middle class for decades, and since the 1970s, companies are increasingly prioritizing these short-term gains for shareholders over long-term interests of the company that ultimately could be long-term interests of the workforce. I love this photo of them at their camp. What do we need? Healthcare. When do we need it? Now. Karen sees the retirees as victims of corporate greed. She says, I understand the Occupy movement and what they're protesting. She understands that this gap between management and workers has widened, financially, as we'll look at, but also socially and psychologically. It's like as this distance grows, it is easier for the people who are running these companies to look at workers as expendable, as a line item on a spreadsheet, right? Not as people. And another chart here, kind of looking at the 60s to present. So at the beginning there would have been when Henry Kaiser opened the Ravenswood plant. So this is looking at how much does a CEO make in comparison to like a typical worker. Around 1960, that was about 20 times more. You can see it grows kind of slowly to 1990. And then there is the insane jump that is where we still are today, and as this story is taking place. So this is another shot of their Occupy camp. Karen announces on Facebook that the retirees will be setting up a tent at the entrance to Century Aluminum on Sunday, December 18th at noon to begin the 24-hour-a-day Occupy Century Aluminum. They had their Christmas that year. Karen's family had their Christmas at the Occupy camp. She put out on Facebook requests for donations, firewood, blankets, tents, Christmas decorations. And as if it were a picket schedule, retirees schedule overnight shifts so that they can take turns and always have somebody overnight so that there really is a 24-hour-a-day presence here. They have volunteers, several of the wives who are bringing in food for who's ever there during the day. They have volunteers dropping off firewood. You can see the burn barrel that they have set up for warmth. They have shifts, but there are a couple of men who have spent every single night at camp. And I love this picture because it looks like it could also be at a hunting camp or 4th of July. And something that I really admired, I mean, when people talk about this experience, it was overwhelmingly positive. And I think what has stood out to me is this was hard, what they were going through, but the people who stepped up really, like, had great relationships with one another. They had a good time a lot of the time that they were together. And this was an example of it. I think truly that it was fun for some of these guys to be camped out night after night together, you know? After primarily having like a working relationship for so many decades. However, you know, they don't forget why they are there. And Karen posts this update on January 2012. It's a sad day at Occupy. Sonny Heinzman may have had a stroke. She says, so he has Medicare, but he didn't purchase any additional insurance after losing Centuries because to cover his wife and daughter, he was paying already $1,700 a month. She says, this is why we will never give up. And if this works, I want to show a video of Karen speaking, just so you get a chance to see her. But I think what I have to do is play it here.
There's things happening all over the place, and
So sorry, I didn't test that.
some good,
Gosh.
some not so good.
Hello.
But,
Oh my gosh.
I think we got everybody in California and West Virginia scrambling right now, and worrying just a little bit.
All right, one more time. Everyone okay? Gosh.
All over the place, and some good and some not so good. But I think we got everybody in California and West Virginia scrambling right now, and worrying just a little bit about the retirees in Jackson County. And I don't want to go into details, but I think we're going to do this, guys. I think we're going to do it. And for the first time in a long time, they all know where we stand, and we're dead serious on what they owe us and how they better get her done. And I want to tell you this, I talked to the governor's office this morning, and they are 199% behind the retirees, and they were thankful to God that I let them know before they went into this meeting with the company today exactly where the retirees stand.
So that is Karen. I'm going to see if I can find my slides again. Okay. So yeah, that was one of the videos. There was a freelance photojournalist, James Passenger, who was covering the Occupy movement and came, when he heard about what the retirees were doing, he came down from Detroit and spent time with them, and was able to capture that video and a couple others. And that video, Karen is emotional. That was a hard day. So they had learned within a month of them setting up camp, the retirees are invited to talks with the union and Century. And I want to point that out, that the retirees were invited as like their own party to sit at these negotiations. So it's exactly what they have hoped for. And as things are fleshed out, so the union and Century reach an agreement. It's a meeting that the retirees are not present for, and Karen learns the day before this video was taken, maybe hours before that video was taken, that the way that the settlement is written, retiree benefits will restart once the Ravenswood plant restarts. And that was a point of contention for them because they need their benefits now, right? And it could take a year for everything to sort of, all the agreements to be worked out to get the plant operational. In spite of this not being everything they wanted, they vote and accept the settlement, and they pack up their camp after 78 days through the winter. So they held a vote, retirees accept. And now, in a special session, the West Virginia legislature passes this year's version of this Energy-Intensive Industrial Consumers Revitalization Tax Credit Act. Now, at this point, because retiree benefits are tied to the plant restarting, this bill is now the first step to the plant restarting, which is the first step to retirees getting their benefits back. And, you know, this, like looking at this really helped, I really think I understood better like what an anchor Century was, you know, not just for the region, but the state. They consume a huge amount of electricity, which means a huge amount of coal. Everyone in the State House like wanted the plant to reopen. The union wants the plant to reopen, right? Because those are their workers. And so in this special session, the retirees show up for the vote, and they are applauded by their representatives for what they've done. And Governor Tomlin comes to Ravenswood and signs this bill with Karen looking over his shoulder. So the clock starts ticking now. Settlement has a 1.5-year expiration date. The next step is for Century and the Appalachian Power Company to agree on terms for Century to purchase electricity. Those terms then have to be approved by the Public Service Commission, and the plan that Century introduces is controversial. They want to be able to pay less for electricity when they're making less for the aluminum that they're selling. No one in the state is really in favor of this besides Century. And, you know, because part of the issue is that that it's going to offset other costs on other ratepayers, other people who are purchasing electricity. Karen and others realized that this could include the same retirees that are trying to get their health care back. And so even though this is like tied to Karen getting her health care back, she says in her testimony that, you know, she can't support Century's plan as it is. That would raise rate on other retirees. This is such an interesting period of negotiations. The Public Service Commission tries to introduce its own plan that they think Century could like, but it won't hurt other ratepayers. But ultimately, that goes on in the background, and the retirees keep up their campaign. They know they're close, but they also know they are not going to be quiet or sort of stay out of the spotlight as long as this is going on. So here's a photo of them in Hallsville, Kentucky. They are picketing at an event that the company put on its Hallsville plant, where it's a health fair, health and wellness, an event for plant employees. Retirees show up at the entrance to the plant, and they have this cemetery that they've brought with a cross and the name of every retiree who has now passed away in the year plus that they have not been, they've been without Century's insurance. The next year is hard. Century and Appalachian Power Company, by the end of 2012, are still unable to reach an agreement. And in 2013, Century's focus shifts now to Kentucky, where they are looking and actively pursuing negotiations with the electric company there to get a more favorable rate. They threaten to shut down their plant. Another aluminum company says, we'll shut down too if we don't get our rates lower. And they again approach the legislature. There are 2 bills introduced that could kind of work similarly to the bill in West Virginia. And it works here. So in the spring of 2013, the power company in Kentucky agrees to a better rate for Century, and Century then purchases an aluminum smelter in Kentucky. And a couple months later in West Virginia, the settlement agreement that retirees were counting on expires. So they're back to Century's shareholders meeting in the fall. And this is, I love this picture of them. So that in the center is the photographer who traveled with them and was at this meeting. Several of the retirees, I think it looks like also several people that they met up with in Chicago. They brought the fat cat with them and are outside of Century's new headquarters. Century had moved their headquarters to Chicago. So Mike Bless is the new CEO of Century at this point. Logan Kruger was the CEO when this started. And Karen and the retirees are able to meet with Mike Bless outside of the shareholders meeting before it begins. They have this long conversation in the hallway where Karen talks about how she just had a health scare. She doesn't know if it was a mini stroke or what. Her family begged her to go to the emergency room, and she's not going. And she says at one point, like, Mike, we live in the real world, and we live this settled, acknowledging that he doesn't understand what this is like. He doesn't understand, like, the stress that they're living with. So for the next year, Karen says here, having meetings every 2 or 3 months that result in more questions than answers is not my idea of progress. That's sort of how these years feel to her, with the PSC saga dragging on. So Century is now only nominally engaged in West Virginia. The plant is still idle. The electricity deal has expired. These chapters in the book focus more on Karen's life and her challenges, the emotional toll that this has, the stress and how that's affecting her health. At this point, it's 2014. She has looked into Affordable Care Act coverage. There was a $7,000 deductible. She knows that it's catastrophic coverage at best. She knows she's also turning 65, I think, in the next year. And on principle, she holds out again and says, like, I'll get my health care when everyone else gets their health care. So September 2014 to May 2015, Century again is focused sort of outside of West Virginia. They purchased another aluminum facility in South Carolina. There are contract negotiations that have stalled and are not going well at all in Hallsville, Kentucky. Karen is very active in this fight in Hallsville in terms of communicating with Mike Bless, trying to get him to understand the workers' side, trying to prevent Kentucky from facing a strike or a lockout. All of this takes up a lot of time, and finally, in midsummer of 2015, Hallsville has a contract. South Carolina is sort of up and running, and Mike says, now it's time to turn our attention to Ravenswood. July 2015, he requests an in-person meeting with the retirees. Karen now is directly communicating with the CEO, and so he asks to meet in person and says, I didn't want you to read this in the news, but we are not going to be able to reopen the plant. We are walking away from Ravenswood. And devastating, of course, but I want to mention here that Mike Bless, the CEO of an aluminum company, flew from, I think he was in California, to West Virginia to meet face-to-face with the retirees and let them know the company's decision. It wasn't the first time that he had sat down with them face-to-face to hear their opinions or to talk to them. And he and Karen really do manage to bridge that gap that I talked of and to talk to one another and meet one another as people, as individuals. So this is devastating news. Mike Bless also says that healthcare, this does not mean that we're walking away from healthcare, that the board is going to look over everything. We still want to do what we can. And so in September 2015, for the third time, the retirees travel to Century's shareholders meeting and make their case to the board of directors. Again, the same case all these retirees want is to live out the rest of their retirement with the security and dignity that every person deserves. It's the only right thing to do. In a few days later, so the United Steelworkers, when benefits were lost, take Century to court. And so that has been going on in the background. The retirees are sort of on their own, with this very active campaign. The United Steelworkers are in the courts. It has not gone well. And this, in September 2015, once again, a judge rules in Century's favor. The retirees know that it's going to be appealed, but they have kind of lost hope in the courts at this point. But Karen has not lost hope completely in Mike Bless and his promise that they were not giving up. She writes an email to him saying, "I have a strong sense that you are really seeing the immorality of this decision very strongly, and that you have a sense of understanding about our situation as best as you could from a distance. We need our benefits now, just as you expect your benefits to be paid when you have earned them. I trust you when you say that you are in discussion and research. Please trust me when I say that time is not our friend." In January 2016, Mike reaches out directly to Karen. Mike Bless reaches out to Karen and says that the board is going to take care of retiree health care. And he's made his case to the board. So coming to a settlement will remove any remaining liability that this court case is still pending, that there is still an appeal. It's going to improve Century's image, which has not been doing great in these last 7 years of the retirees being very active. And it is the right thing to do, is his third point. So again, it takes a year. It's August 2017 before there's a meeting again between the United Steelworkers, Century, and the retirees in Pittsburgh. And at the beginning of that meeting, Mike Bless, CEO, says, "I wanted to acknowledge before we get started that if it wasn't for this woman, Karen Gorel, we wouldn't be here today." Afterwards, the judge approves, yes, the settlement is approved. And the judge notably called the settlement generous, given how the court had ruled in Century's favor, and that essentially they were kind of off the hook. These are the retirees I have been speaking about. Karen Gorel is in the center, surrounded by what she called her retiree army. I think only maybe missing is Mary Morris, might be taking the photo. So Karen says, "This truly has been an amazing journey and a story worth telling to give others hope who may want to quit." About their settlement, so Century's agreed to pay $23 million in installments over 10 years. And something that Karen said, her takeaway is the retirees had no leverage at this point. There wasn't even a plant in Ravenswood that was going to open. It really was, in her eyes, miraculous that they were able to walk away with anything at this point. They walk away with $20 million that's going to put in a VEBA and be able to pay for retirees' future healthcare costs. At that negotiation meeting with the company and the union, Karen pleads for back pay for a $6 million is what she asked for to compensate what retirees have spent out of pocket. Company comes back with $3 million, and bittersweet. I mean, it is something. So many people paid so much more. They were eligible. Each person could claim up to $5,000. If someone, like a spouse, was deceased, you could claim $1,000. People certainly spent tens of thousands of dollars in these 7 years. But with the settlement now, retirees can be reimbursed going forward for their health expenses or can purchase a plan. In 2018, Karen is continuing to fight for getting additional back pay. That $3 million, not all of it was claimed, and so she wants retirees who had more than $5,000 in expenses to be able to reapply and get more out of it. Eventually, I think the others tell her, like, it's okay. You know, we've done enough. Like, whatever it's going to take to get this is maybe not worth what we're going to get. But throughout this time, so from 2017 until 2020, when the pandemic kind of shuts down meetings, the retiree committee holds space every 2 weeks for any retiree who has a question about the settlement, question about the paperwork, which we know when they're submitting reimbursement, it can be complex. There are new retirees who turn 65 and they need to get signed up. So they hold these meetings every 2 weeks where anyone can come and they have people who can help you with the paperwork, which I think is incredible. So they continue and they have their annual meetings, an annual Christmas party every year until the pandemic. And also in 2018, when I met Karen, she was speaking to a group of college students visiting with the Appalachian Institute. And I think so she says to the kids at the end of her talk, I hope one of you goes out and picks up the cross and works from your heart. That's how we won our battle. We put our hearts into it and wouldn't let anyone keep us down. I think witnessing how students responded to Karen helped me to see the importance of this story, of sharing it. I sort of sometimes imagine like a historian in 50 years, like coming across some of Karen's quotes in newspaper articles and knew that this was a story that people would be interested in like digging up, you know? I think young people today, even more than previous generations, are sort of removed from an understanding of past labor struggles, what was sacrificed to get to where we are today, and at the same time, we're seeing benefits scaled back and chipped away. Fewer pensions, fewer retirement and healthcare plans being offered. Gig work is on the rise with no benefits. Social service programs being scaled back. Karen had even said that she took her healthcare for granted until she lost it. So it's a moment where we don't want to sort of lose sight of what's came before. New unions are emerging at the same time. Amazon, fast food, Starbucks. Young people are standing up, and I think having role models are important. Not just Mother Jones, right? Where you can kind of say that, oh, like 100 years ago, we had some really like strong women, standing up. But to have examples from right now and from recent history, from our lifetimes, the same way that Karen was inspired by her dad's work with the union and the retirees were inspired with the lockout. I'm hoping there will be young women in West Virginia inspired by Karen. That's it.
Okay, we have a little tiny bit of time for questions. If you do have a question for Julia, just raise your hand and I'll come to you with the microphone. Anybody have a question? Okay, I'm coming.
Here you go. Thanks, Julia. The $20 million that was set aside for the retirees, that was for the 750 or so current retirees. So are current Century Aluminum workers eligible for health care once they retire? Or has that offer been rescinded by that company?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. It was set up so that at that moment and then going forward, as retirees turn 65, they can apply to be part of the settlement, and it lasts as long as there is money available.
Yes, I worked strike security for 10 years all over the U.S., and I was always shocked at how much money the companies would just throw away to break the union. Millions of dollars, and generally the strikes were over health care costs.
Yeah.
Anybody else have a question or a comment they want to share? All right, thank you.